Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom and welcome to today's Daf Yomi. We're at Niddah Daf Mem Aleph, 3 lines from the top. Zok the Gemara, Katani Miyas. In any case, the Brisa states, Yoitze Daifen Deloi. A child who was born by a cesarean is not included in the halacha of Alu Lo Yerdu. Such a carbon is puzzled to the extent that even if you brought it up on the Mizbeach, you must remove it. Let's make a quick summary of the previous blot. We're in the middle of the sugi of Yoitze Daifen, a child who was born by a cesarean. We have 3 separate examples: Adam, Bechor, and Behemas Kachim. There's a Machlekes of Shimon and Rabbanan regarding an Adam, a human who was born by a cesarean, whether or not it is considered a legal Leda regarding the Meituma, Imei Tahara, and Karban Leda. According to the Rabbanan, according to Tanna Kama, those halachas do not apply in this case, only by a natural childbirth. According to Reb Shimon, a cesarean childbirth as well is considered a Leda regarding all the halachas of Leda. Regarding Bechor, there's no machlekes, there's no dispute. Everybody agrees that a Bechor, in order for it to have Kedushas Bechor, needs to be Peta Rechem, to open the womb, meaning to be born in a natural manner. However, regarding all other Behemas Kachim, Rabbi Yechanan was mechadish that even according to Reb Shimon, that would not be considered a kosher carbon, and it will not obtain Kedushas Haguf, but rather merely Kedushas Damim. It would be considered an object that belongs to Beis HaMikdash, but is unfit to be hukrav on the Mizbeach. And the Gemara went ahead and brought a brisa to prove this halacha of Rabbi Yechanan, that even according to Reb Shimon, who holds that regarding Adam, even a Yoitze Daifen is considered a Yalud, is considered a birth. However, regarding Behemas Kachim, we go ahead and compare it to Bechor. Just like Bechor does not have a din of Kedushas Bechor when it's a Yoitze Daifen, so too a Behema who was born derech Yoitze Daifen is unfit for a carbon to the extent that it doesn't even have Kedushas Damim, it is not headed to the Mizbeach, and to the extent that even if you already brought it on the Mizbeach, you need to remove it. So the Gemara today goes back to that raya, that in any case the Mishnah says, the Brisa says I should say, that a Yoitze Daifen has a din of Im Alu Yerdu. It is clumped together with all the other major psulim, Reveh, Nirva, etc., and it doesn't even have the Kedushas Haguf required for the halacha of Im Alu Yerdu, which just supports the Shita, the view of Rabbi Yechanan, that a Yoitze Daifen regarding other Kachim is not Kaddish Kedushas Haguf. So the Gemara Nachamol, Katani Miyas, the Mishnah states, the Brisa states, Yoitze Daifen Deloi, that a Yoitze Daifen is not Kaddish. My love, are we not speaking about Yoitze Daifen, the Kachim? We're speaking about Behema, that was Yoitze Daifen, regarding Kachim, that it does not have Kedushas Mizbeach. Amar Rav Huna, brother of Nasan Loi, you have no raya from here, you can't prove anything from this Brisa, because we're speaking about Yoitze Daifen de Bechor. We're speaking about a Yoitze Daifen regarding a Bechor. And in Bechor, we know that L'kul Yam, even according to Reb Shimon, there's a Ferish pasuk that says that a Bechor needs to be Peta Rechem, and a Yoitze Daifen is not Kaddish with a Kedushas Bechor. Bechor, if that's what the Brisa is speaking about, be Peta Rechem Nafka. If you may recall that the Brisa had derived all the psulim of Im Alu Lo Yerdu from the pasuk of Zois, which excluded this list of psulim. And if the Brisa is referring to a Yoitze Daifen of Bechor, why is it necessary to derive that from the pasuk of Zois? For Bechor we have an explicit pasuk. Otherwise, the pasuk is Peta Rechem, which explicitly states that a Bechor needs to be one that opens the womb. Elamai, so what are you suggesting? The Kachim that the Brisa is speaking about, a behemoth regarding Kachim. If so, you will have the same difficulty. You may recall that yesterday we had learned the psul of Yoitze Daifen by Kachim from Imai, Agzer Shava of Imai from Bechor. So why is it necessary for the Brisa to mention the word Zois? We've already learned it from a different pasuk. Hi Mai. Let's explore. If we are referring to Yoitze Daifen of Kachim it is all well. Why? Then you really do need 2 psukim. Why do you need 2 psukim to be mamayit kachim from Yotze Dofen? Chad lebehemas chulin the oiled derech dofen ve'agdishe. One pasuk will be referring to a behema of chulin, which was not kaddish yet, who was moiled, who gave birth derech Yotze Dofen, and he went ahead and he was magdish that behema, or he's attempting to be magdish that behema for the mizbeach. And the pasuk tells you that we derive from b'chor, just like b'chor, there's no kedusha of Yotze Dofen, so to every behema that is a Yotze Dofen is invalid for kedusha. So that would be learned from imay imay. V'chad, and then you need an additional pasuk lebehemas kachim de'oile derech dofen. You need an additional chiddush to tell you that even a behema which is already kodesh, which is already kachim, and gave birth, still in all the child, the offspring of that behemas kachim, who was born derech Yotze Dofen, does not acquire the kedusha of its own mother, and is excluded from hakrava, and is excluded from the mizbeach. Ukasavar, and this brayso will maintain velades kachim b'havyasin in kedoshim. There's machlekes regarding the offspring of kachim. When do they become kaddish? Is it at the time of conception, or do they need to wait until they become, meaning until they're actually born? So this brayso will follow the view that velades kachim get kedusha only at the moment of birth, and if that's the case, the kedusha of the mother only is chal, only gets applied to the child during childbirth, and at that point it is a Yotze Dofen. So it's sort of happening together at the same time, and therefore I would perhaps think to say that the kedusha is chal, being that the psul had not preceded the kedusha, but rather had come simultaneous at the same time. I would think to say that perhaps the kedusha is chal, and therefore you need an extra pasuk to mafkia, to exclude even such a case, so that it's all well. Now we know why we need 2 psukim to teach us the similar halacha of Yotze Dofen. However, if you propose that the Bryce is speaking about a b'chor, why would you need 2 psukim? Why would you need a pasuk of zois to exclude b'chor? We already know that from the other pasuk. There's a pasuk that says specifically, clearly, that a b'chor that's born other than the natural way is not considered kedushas b'chor, so it wouldn't be necessary to have another pasuk. So therefore it's a raya. This is a solid proof that the brayso inevitably must be speaking about a behemas kachim, an ordinary behemas kachim, and it is excluded from kedushas mizbeach, just as Rabbi Yochanan had proposed. This is very logical. Since the brayso puts together in the list of those that are pasul l'gabi mizbeach im olu yerdu, the brayso lists a reveya v'hanirba, a behema that did znus or had znus done to it, v'hamuktzah was set aside for v'dezor, v'avnevad who was worshipped, v'akalayim who was born from a crossbreed. Hani mahacha nafka, mahasam nafka. How could you group all these together in the same category and exclude them from the pasuk of zois? For those psulim, we actually have another pasuk to mimayit them from the mizbeach, which is min ha-behema. This is right in the beginning of Parshas Vayikra. It says, Adam ki yakiv miken karban Hashem, min ha-behema, min ha-bakar, or min ha-tzoin. These are words of exclusion. Min ha-behema lohitzi ha-reveya v'hanirva. To exclude a reveya v'hanirva that is not kosher for the mizbeach. Min ha-bakar, lohitzi ha-nevat. Min ha-tzoin, lohitzi ha-muktzeh. Min ha-tzoin, the additional vav, lohitzi ha-negeach. To exclude a behema who gored a person and killed him, and it is possible for hakrava. So therefore, it is unnecessary to have an additional pasuk of zois. So therefore, it must be that there's a reason why we need to have 2 psukim. Vesu, just in a moment. Kalayim, another raya. Kalayim mahacha nafka. How could you propose that kalayim is nismayed from zois? Mehasam nafka. We actually have another pasuk. Shoir or kesav eza ox or a sheep or a goat. Shoir prat lekalayim. It will be mimayit crossbreed or ez prat lenidme. It is being mimayit excluding a behema who is a resembler. He doesn't look similar to his parents. Ella. So the question is, why then do you need zois to be mimayit this group of cases? We already have other psukim that teach us the same thing. Ella, you must say it's Rich Trei, you need two psukim. Why is that? Like we said earlier, Chad lebehemas chulin. One is to teach you that a behema of this category, who is a behemas chulin, not yet kaddish, that you cannot be mekadesh it. V'chad lebehemas kachim, and the additional pasuk of Zois is coming to exclude a behema which is already kachim. He is an offspring of a behemas kachim. Nevertheless, it is not kaddish v'kedushas mizbeach, and therefore that explains why we need two psukim for the same thing. And if that's the case, we've sort of built up the raya now. If it is necessary to have two psukim because one pasuk is for behemas chulin, and which is the mina behema, mina bakim and atzayin, referring to going ahead and be magdash a behema that you cannot be magdash a behema that is listed in this category, and the additional pasuk mentioned in the brayso of Zois will be referring to a behemas kachim, and the Torah is teaching us that it is excluded from hakrava even though he is an offspring of a behemas kachim. So too in our case, regarding Yetzir Daifen, Hachanami, here too, it's Rich Trei, we need two psukim. The Torah is required to teach us two separate chidushim, coming from two separate psukim. One is for behemas chulin, that is a Yetzir Daifen. Torah is teaching us that it is invalid for hegdish, and the additional pasuk of Zois is referring to a behema who is an offspring of a kachim, and because he was a Yetzir Daifen, he is excluded from hakrava, and therefore yim alu yerdu. So let's make a quick summary of the sugya we have up until now. Regarding Yetzir Daifen, we have three separate categories: a Yetzir Daifen of a adam, a Yetzir Daifen of a behemas kachim, and a Yetzir Daifen of a bachar. Regarding a bachar, there's no dispute. Everyone's maskim, everyone agrees that there is no kedusha, since the Torah explicitly states Peta Rechem needs to open the womb. Even according to Reb Shimon, there is no kedushas bachar on a bachar, on a behema who was born by a cesarean. Regarding Adam, that's the Mishnah at the beginning of the parak, that there is machlekes Tanakama and Reb Shimon. According to the Tanakama, there is no dinei leda regarding imei tuma, imei tahara, and carbon leda. According to Reb Shimon, even a Yetzir Daifen is considered a vlad, a legitimate vlad regarding Meituma, Tahara, and Karbalei. The question remains regarding all other behemoths. A behemoth who was born there, couldn't you go ahead and be magdash it for carbon? And Gemara said, the Rabbi Yochanan, that even according to Reb Shimon, who by Adam does consider a leda of a Yetzir Daifen a legitimate leda, regarding a behemoth's kachim, we will go ahead and compare it to B'chayr rather than compare him to Adam, and therefore he is not Kaddish b'Kedushas kachim and Kedushas haguf. The reason for that is the Gzera Shava of Leda. Leda, Imai, from Behemas Kachim to connected to B'chayr. And the question remains, why do we need two psukim for the same halacha? Why do we need the Gzera Shava as well as the pasuk of Zois that is mentioned in the brayso? And the answer to that is that we always need two psukim to be mamayit, one for behemas chulin and one for behemas kachim. The same thing we find by the other psulim, Reveya, Nirva, Kalayim, etc. The Torah goes ahead and teaches to us twice. And the reason is because one is for behemas chulin, that he is excluded from the potential hegdish. You cannot go ahead and be magdashim, and one is needed for a vlad kachim, an offspring of a behema which is already kaddish. Nevertheless, because the child has this psul, he is excluded from hakrava. Now it's interesting to note that the Gemara, when the Gemara refers to the Yalfusa, the derivation of behemas kachim from b'char, the Gemara over here mentions the word imai, which is the Gzera Shava from the pasuk of Shivas Yamim Tachas Imai, which is stated by b'char, and the pasuk of kachim Vaya Shivas Yamim Tachas Imai. And in both psukim, the word imay is mentioned to connect kachim to b'char. However, in the Gemara Daf Mem, the Gemara started off with a little bit of a different pasuk, leda, that the Gzera Shava is from the word leda by kachim to the word leda to the term yibaled by b'char. So the question is, why does the Gemara prefer using the Gzera Shava with the words imay over the words leda? Perhaps you can propose that the Gemara is actually cluing us in to the reasoning behind the psul of Yetzer Daifen by Bechor. You see, the Machlekes Reb Shimon Rabban by Yetzer Daifen revolves around the question of whether do we look at the event of Leda, meaning because it was an unnatural event, unnatural occurrence, it was an unnatural phenomenon regarding the mother. Is that considered a proper Leda, although the child is a normal child? There's nothing lacking in the child. According to the Rabbanon, we focus on the mother. Because this wasn't a natural childbirth, there's no carbon Leda, there's no Yimei Tuma, no Yimei Tahara. However, Reb Shimon says, don't look at the mother, focus instead on the child. He's an independent being. And therefore, since he was born, and he is a child, regardless of what the process of Leda was, nevertheless is considered a proper Leda, and the Yimei Tuma and Yimei Tahara apply. However, by Bechor, the Torah is teaching us, yes, you look at the mother. It needs to be Peta Rechem. The Kedushas HaBechor depends on the act of childbirth. If the event occurred naturally, then there's Kedushas Bechor. If not, there is no Kedushas Bechor. So we look at the aim. We focus on the mother. This is even according to Reb Shimon. The question remains, what about ordinary kachim? Do we compare it to Adam? Do we compare it to Bechor? So initially the Gemara brought the Gzeir Shava of Leda Leda. But then the Gemara says, but why go ahead and compare it to Bechor? We have a similar Gzeir Shava, a potential Gzeir Shava from Kachim to Adam. We also have the word Leda mentioned by Adam. Then the Gemara went ahead and said, there is a reason why we prefer Bechor, because in both you find the term Imai. So perhaps you can interpret the words of the Gemara, that the Gemara means to say that we focus on the mother. Just as in Bechor, the Torah is mechalesh to us that we focus on the aim, and being that it wasn't a natural occurrence, mitzad the mother, on the mother's part, it wasn't a natural occurrence, a natural act of Leda, and so too by behemis kachim, since the word imay is found, it also is required to be a natural childbirth. So the bottom line is that the reasoning, the rationale to exclude a Yetzer Daifen is because the focus and the halacha dependent on the mother. So now we understand why the Gemara mentions the term imay, because that highlights the importance of the mother's role in the Leda, which is actually the determining factor to exclude a Yetzer Daifen. Let's see the Gemara Vayta. Tanu Rabbanan, hamakashe shloisha yamim. If an isha has labor pains and she sees dam, if it happened 3 days consecutively before a childbirth, then she will not be considered a zava. If this occurred during the Meiziva, the Torah excludes this specific scenario from the Tumah Ziva. The reason behind that being that the dam is presumed to be as a result of the upcoming Leda, and therefore there's no Tumah Ziva. But that's provided that the Leda was a legal Leda. However, if it wasn't a proper Leda, for instance, a Yetzer Daifen, perhaps the halacha of Kishoy will not apply. Zok the Gemara, hamakasha shloisha yamim, if she was makasha, if she had labor pains and saw dam for 3 days, v'yatzav lad derech daifen, and then the child exited through the daifen, it was a cesarean delivery, harezu yoledes b'zoif. This again is the Tanakama. Tanakama following their opinion that Yetzer Daifen is not a proper Leda, and therefore the halacha of Kishoy will not apply in this case, and the Isha is Tamei Tumah Ziva. For Reb Shimon Omer, Reb Shimon, however, follows his opinion, which is that a Yetzer Daifen of an Adam is considered a Leda, and therefore the halacha of Kishoy will apply, and she is not a Zava. Einzu Yeledes Bezoif. That's the first halacha of the Brisa. Continues the Brisa. Another case. V'dam hayoytze misham tamei. Dam that comes out from that place, which place, we will discuss in a minute, is tamei. That is the shita of the Tanakama. Rabbi Shimon matayr. Rabbi Shimon says it's tar. Bishleim, that's all good and well. Reisha, Rabbi Shimon l'tamei, Rabban l'tamayu. Like we just explained, in the Reisha, it fits very well that Rabban and Rabbi Shimon respectively are following their opinion regarding Yetzer Dofen, whether or not it's considered a Vlad, and subsequently whether there is the halacha of Kishay. Ela Seifa, but in the Seifa, in the latter part of the Brisa, but my pligi, what is the machlekes? Amar Avina kigan sheyatza Vlad derech Dofen. If the Vlad went out derech Dofen, v'dam derech rechem. However, the dam had come out the normal way, and the question now remains whether she is a zava or not. V'azir Reb Shimon l'tamei. Reb Shimon will follow his view that the Leda, even though it was derech Yetzer Dofen, it is a proper Leda, and therefore there is no dam ziva because she was makasha. Rabbanon l'tamei, Rabbanon following their opinion, which is that a Yetzer Dofen is not a Leda. So basically, it's a mirror of the first part of the Brisa. Maskef Rabbi Yosef. Chada, how could you say this pshat? One thing, the Hainu Reisha, this is exactly the same halacha mentioned in the Reisha. It's a sort of a repetition. V'oid, in addition, the Brisa uses the word dam hayotze misham. According to your interpretation of things, the Vlad was derech Yetzer Dofen, and the dam was derech rechem. It doesn't seem to fit well with the words of the Brisa. V'oid, in addition, misham makom Vlad mashma. It sounds like we're speaking about the same makom of the Vlad. Ella, Amar Rav Yosef, you must say a different pshat. Kigoyin was speaking sheyatza Vlad v'dam derech Dofen. We're speaking about a case, a totally new case, where the Vlad and the dam both came out derech Dofen. So what is the machlekes? Ubimakoir, the source, meaning the rechem, mekoymoi tamei, does it have a tumah on its place? Kamiflagi they are arguing about. Meaning, dam, although it is not exiting the natural way, it is coming out derech Dofen. However, since it passes through the makar, the uterus, do we say that nevertheless, because it comes into contact with that makom, it acquires a tumah and can actually be metame the isha as well? So that is machlekes in the seif of the Brisa between Reb Shimon and the Chachamim. Mar savar makar mekame tame. The Tanna Kama holds the makar is tame, and therefore the dam coming, even if it's coming through the Dofen, being that it passed through the makar is tame. Or Mar savar, however, Reb Shimon holds makar mekame tar. So they're totally unrelated machlekes. So in summary, we have a Brisa with two separate machlekes, and the first one is regarding an isha that's mekasha, who sees dam during the meziva 3 days prior to a leidas Yetzer Dofen, and the question remains whether a Yetzer Dofen has a din of a leida or not. And Rabbanan and Reb Shimon both follow their respective views regarding the leida of a Yetzer Dofen. According to the Rabbanan, he is not a leida, and therefore the isha will have tuma ziva, since the dam was not preceding an act of childbirth, a legitimate legal act of childbirth. However, according to Reb Shimon, it is considered a leida, and therefore she is exempt from Tuma Ziva in that case. The Seif of the Brisa, however, according to Rabbi Yosef, is discussing a totally new scenario where the dam came out with the Vlad through the Dofen, and the question remains whether you need, in order for the Isha to become Tameh, is the dam required to exit through the natural passageways, or even in this case, since it came into contact with the makar, the dam becomes Tameh? According to Rabbanan, yes. According to Reb Shimon, no. Now, what kind of tumah are we speaking about? Is she Tameh Tumas Niddah, or is it just a less stringent tumah of Tumas Erev, only up until nightfall because she came into contact with a dam, similar to coming into contact with anything that's Tameh, which can be a Tameh person, but only sometimes it's only a tumah kala, a lenient tumah, which is that day only. So we have a machlekes coming up between Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan in this regard. Amar Rish Lakish, l'divrei hametame b'dam. According to the shita, the dam which passes through the makar, even though it hasn't exited through the natural passageway, is tamei metame be'isha. So to the isha is tamei as if she's a nida. The divrei hametar b'dam. According to the shita, that the dam that's passing through the makar, meaning according to Reb Shimon, the dam is tar, metar be'isha. So too the isha will remain tar. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, no. After divrei hametame b'dam, even according to the Rabbanon, that the dam is tamei, metar be'isha. It is not a re'iyas dam. She is not a tumas nida for 7 days. It is merely a tumas dam. And if the isha comes into contact with the dam, so she'll become tamei tumas erev until nightfall, but not a tumas nida. V'az the Rabbi Yochanan tamei. Rabbi Yochanan is following his opinion elsewhere. The Amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Shimon verichai. And how do we know she'ein isha tmeya at sheyetze madvei derech harvasa? Isha can only become tumas nida if the dam exits through the normal passageway. Shenemar, it says in the pasuk, v'isha she'ishka v'isha lives with the isha dava who's a nida v'gila es harvasa. He will megala arayis as mekoyer era his source. He revealed. The pasuk is teaching us with these extra words. Malamed she'ein isha tmeya. Isha can only become tumas nida at sheyetze madvei derech harvasa. Only if the dam exits through the natural passageway. So too in our case, when the dam has come out through the doifen, the dam perhaps can be tamei because it came into contact with the rechem, and the isha as well, since she comes into contact with the dam. But that is only tumas erev. It is only a tumah for that day, but not the chamer, the stringent tumah of tumas nida. For that, one is required to see dam in the natural fashion. So in conclusion, we have a machlekes about dam that passes through, comes into contact with the rechem, but does not exit through the rechem. According to the Tanakama, it is dam tamei and can be metame the isha. According to Rav Shimon, it is dam toher. On that we have a machlekes Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. According to Rish Lakish, the Manda Amar, the Shita who holds dam mekoyer tamei, and therefore the dam is tamei, the isha as well is considered a full-fledged nida. According to Rabbi Yochanan, no. There is a requirement for nida. The requirement is natural flow of dam. In the case of the dam coming out through the daifen, there will be a tumah, but only a limited tumah of tumas erev. Now the Gemara, the upcoming Gemara, will list two more examples of tumas erev. Omer Shlokish from Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya, Mekor Shenekar. Part of the makar of the uterus that was dislodged v'nafal la'aretz and fell down to the ground, and obviously on the way out there was contact. The isha made contact with that flesh. Tmei she's tamei shenemar yan hishafech nishchuштech vatigli ervasech. Your bottom, your shulayim, Rashi says, it's like the bottom part has spilled over, vatigli ervasech, and your erva was revealed. You see from here that although the nichuштech, the rechem, got spilled over, got dislodged, nevertheless it is still considered, still has a status of ervasech. Lamai, frekti gemar lamai. What are we referring to? Ilay mulatumas shiva, that she is tamei because she is a nida. Dam rachman v'lechaticha, you can't even entertain that. This is not a dam. This is not dam nida. This is a piece of flesh. Ela latumas erev. We are speaking merely about tumas erev, since she comes into contact with a davar tamei, in this case part of the rechem. So she too is tamei, but merely until nightfall. Of Rabbi Yochanan, we have a similar halacha in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Makar, the womb sheizia kishtei tipei margolius, which produced 2 drops of liquid, pearl-colored liquid, light-colored liquid, 2 white drops. Tmeya, she's tamei, even though it's not red and it doesn't look like dam. Lamai, frekti gemara, what is this concerning? Ilay mulatumas shiva, that she is tamei as a nida. Chamisha damim tameim beisha. We know from previous Mishnah in the Masechta that there are only 5 types of dam that is metame isha. 5 shades of red, and nothing white can be metame the isha. Vesulay, only 5 and no more. Ella, you must be referring to letumas erev, that she's tamei because she comes into contact with a davar tamei, so she's tamei for that day and that day only. So the Gemara, in conclusion, v'dafka tarti, only if there are 2 drops. Aval chada, if it's only 1, amor, I would say me'al ma'aseh, perhaps it came from the other side of the guf, not from the actual makar, and therefore there's no basis for being metame the isha. So let's make a quick review of the Gemara up until now. We had discussed the inyan of Yetze Doifen, whether or not it has a din of Leda regarding Adam, regarding Behemas Kachim, and regarding Bechor. There was a machlekes of Shimon and Rabbanan regarding Adam, According to the Rabbanan, there is no din leida. According to Rav Shimon, there is din leida. And we actually have four. Today we added a fourth ramification to this halacha. Number one, we had Yimei Tumah, whether or not the Yimei Tumah apply. Number two, whether or not Yimei Tahara apply. Whether or not she is obligated to bring a korban leida. And today we added a fourth one, whether or not the halacha of Kishui will apply. If she sees dam 3 days preceding the leida during the Yimei Ziva, and she had experienced labor pains with the dam, according to the shita that the Yetzidayfin is a vlad, so the isha is exempt from tumas ziva since the dam is connected with a leida. However, according to Rav Shimon, according to the Rabbanan, since the Yetzidayfin is not a vlad, is not a leida, the halacha of kisha will not apply. Then the Gemara went ahead into a different sugya regarding dam that exits in an unnatural fashion, whether or not it's tamei. There is machlekes makar and mekame tamei or not, meaning dam that comes into contact with the makar, does it have a tumah or not? In that itself, we have a machlekes. To what extent, even the shita that holds makar and mekame tamei, the dam is tamei. To what extent is it matame the isha? Is it only tumas erev according to Rabbi Yochanan, because you need dam to come out derech ervasa in order to be matame the isha tumas niddah? Or do you say even in this case there's tumas niddah? That is the shita of Reish Lakish. And then we had two additional cases of tumas erev. One is that a part of the makar got dislodged and fell out, and the isha came into contact with it, and therefore she's tamei tumas erev. And the final halacha in the name of Rabbi Yochanan about the two droplets of white-colored liquid, which are matame the isha as well, tumas erev. Let's go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah mentioned that there's a difference between the tumah of a ish, of keri and zav, where the tumah has to actually exit the guf in order to be matame him. However, by an isha, whether it's nida, zava, etc., the tumah, the dam, only needs to come out from the interior of the isha, from the rechem, up until the bayis hachitzain, the external chamber, but not completely outside the guf, and she's already going to be tamei. We learn it from the pasuk of Biv Sarah. If the dam is seen inside her flesh, meaning it doesn't even need to exit the guf in order to be tamei the isha. Now, what is the definition, the exact taich of bayis hachitzain? Kol anoshim zok the Gemara metamin bebayis hachitzon. Hi niu bayis hachitzon. What is bayis hachitzon? Omer shlokish kol sheti noikes yesheves. A small girl sits v'niris, and it is visible. That is considered the bayis hachitzon. From there on in is not considered the bayis hachitzon, but rather the bayis apnimi. You need to have the dam come to the area which is visible. When a teneketz will sit down, and that area which is visible then is considered the bayis hachitzon. Of Rabbi Yochanan, that can't be. The area which you're referring to, Goloi, who is revealed Eitel Sheretz. That is a revealed area, is visible. That is not considered in the interior of the Isha. That is as if it came outside. The Mishnah says the Isha is Matami Bifnim. That is not Bifnim. That is not considered a concealed area. In fact, if that Makam comes into contact with a Sheretz, the Isha is Tamei. We know that in order for a person to become Tamei, by coming into contact with a davar tamei, it needs to be through via a aver which is begali, which is revealed. However, if a tumah comes into contact with a person in the part of the person which is concealed, which is beis hastorim, we learn from a pasuk that there is no status of negias tumah in that case. So Rabbi Yochanan, this area which you're referring to is gilui etel sheretz. It is not even considered beis hastorim. It has no din of seiser, of concealment. And therefore it can't be that is where the Mishnah is referring to when the Mishnah says that the dam is metame inside. That is not considered inside, but rather outside. It must be that we are deeper than that. Elo Rabbi Yochanan bein hashinayim. Up until the bein hashinayim. Now there are little droplets of skin that protrude into the vaginal cavity, which resemble teeth, shinayim, and that's the term bein hashinayim. So up until there, it's considered bayis hachitzon, which is much more further inside than Rish Lakish's description. Fakti Gemara, iboilu bein hashinayim kelefnim or kelechutz. You mentioned the term bein hashinayim. If the dam is from the bein hashinayim onward, meaning if it's flowing out from the bein hashinayim onward, it is considered the Bayis HaChitzon. What about the actual area of the Bein HaShinayim? Is that considered still inside and is not Matami the Isha? Or is that already considered the Bayis HaChitzon and the Isha is Tamei? So to Gemara Tashma, and here the Tani Rab Zakai ad Bein HaShinayim, until the Bein HaShinayim, meaning from outward all the way, from the outside all the way till the Bein HaShinayim, is considered the Bayis HaChitzon. Or Bein HaShinayim Atzmon Kilifnim. The Bein HaShinayim itself has the din of Lifnim and is not considered the Bayis HaChitzon. Masi Satana, the Brayso we have learned, Mokem Disha, what is considered the Bayis HaChitzon, up until the spot where the Aver Ish threshes. My Mokem Disha, Rav Yehuda, Mokem Shashamash Dosh. So in the Rambam, in the Yad HaChazaka, it seems to be that the two descriptions of the Gemara, Ad Bein HaShinayim and Ad Mokem Shashamash Dosh, are both the same identical point, and up until there is considered the Bayis HaChitzon and is Matame the Isha. Tan Rabbanan, we learned in the Brayso. Bivsara, and the Isha sees dam, Bivsara and her flesh malamed shemetama bifnim kibachutz. The Isha is not required to see dam come flowing out of a guf, but even if it's bifnim, she is also going to be tamei. Ve'enli ela nida, this is only applied to nida. Zava menayin. How do we know the same thing will apply by a zava? Tamulaima zoiva. Bivsara. Peiletes shechvar zera menayin. An Isha who emits the zera, she is going to be tamei in that case as well. And how do we know that if the zera has only come to the point of the Beis HaChitzon but has not been expelled from the body completely, she's going to be tamei, similar to dam nida and dam ziva. Talmud Loimar, the pasuk says yiyeh, which is coming to include even peiletes shechva zera. So in conclusion, the Isha has a din of re'iyah mifnim kimi bachutz. She's not required to have the dam exit the guf, even if it only came up to the Bayis HaChitzon. She has dinei nida, dinei ziva, and dinei peiletes shechva zera as well. This is according to the Tanakama. Reb Shimon Oimer Daya Kabayla. Reb Shimon is disagreeing with this last halacha of peiletes shechva zera, Isha who emits zera. So Reb Shimon, it is not sufficient that the zera had only exited to the Bayis HaChitzon. Daya Kabayla. It is enough if we equate her to the bayal, to the husband. Just like the ish, we all know from the Mishnah that by a man, the tumah is only matamim once it exits the guf. So too by the isha. Being that, where did the zera come from? It came from the ish. It cannot be that she has a more stringent status than the individual who the zera had come from. Being that the zera originated by the ish, it is enough that if we equate the halacha of the isha to that of the ish, and just like by the ish, he will only be tamei if the zera actually exits his guf, so too by the isha, she's only tamei when zera actually comes out. Let's see the Gemara again. Reb Shimon Oimer Daya Kebayala. Ma Bayala, just like the Bayala, Eina Matama Sheteitze Tuma Lachutz. Afi, so too the Isha, Eina Matama, she will not become tamei ad until Sheteitze Tumasa Lachutz. Very the Gemara. The Savar of Shimon Daya Kebayala. Is that true that Reb Shimon holds that we equate the woman to the man? V'atanya v'lunt on a brayso v'rach tzuba mayim v'tamei adarev. This is referring to an isha that had tashmish. They need to immerse in a mikveh and be tamei until nightfall, and then they are completely tar. Amar Reb Shimon, v'chima bozel lamdeinu. What is the purpose of this pasuk? What is it teaching us? Im l'inyan negeya v'shechva zera. If an individual comes into contact with zera, meaning that he had an external contact with zera, that he is tamei. Is that what the Torah is teaching us? Harei kfar nema lamata. We already learned in the pasuk later on. Oyish asher teitze mimenu shechva zera. If a person comes into contact with zera, he is tamei. And Rashi explains that we learn from this pasuk two things. Firstly, if a person had a emission of zera, the natural way, he is tamei, and as well if he comes into contact externally with zera, he is tamei. So we know from that pasuk. We don't need the former pasuk for that. So what then is the Torah teaching us with v'rachzu b'amayim v'tamu adarev? What is the purpose of the pasuk? Ella bat mipnei shetumas beis hastarim hi. Let's think for a second. How did the isha during tashmish come into contact with the zera? It is via a concealed area of naguf. It is internally. We know that when tumah comes into contact with an individual in the area of a base hastorim, in a concealed area, there's no tumah. So in this case, how do we know that the isha should be tummy? Since the zera came into contact with the isha in a concealed area. So therefore, the Torah has to be machadash, has to teach us a new brand new halacha, that although regarding all other tumas, you need external, revealed contact, just as an example of yadayim, of hands that touch the tumah, but not an area which is concealed. However, an isha that had tashmish is exeris akasav. It is a brand new chiddush that there's a tumah, regardless of whether or not there was an external contact with zera. The contact took place in a beis hastarim. Ordinarily, we know that a contact with a beis hastarim is not matama the person. Ella, however, shekzeres akasav, it is a new chiddush that the isha is tamei. Bottom line, you see from here that an isha will become tamei even with an internal contact. So that is very clearly not equated to the ish. An ish is only tamei when the tumah actually exits his guf, or he comes into an external contact with a davar tamei. How could we differentiate between the isha and the ish according to Reb Shimon? You, Reb Shimon, hold that the isha is always equated to the ish. Since the zera had originated from the ish, you cannot be machmir, you can't be more stringent on the isha than the ish. And here we have a brayso which teaches us the opposite, that we have a tumah that is applied to an isha, although a similar tumah will never be applied to an ish. Al Gemara loy kasha, it is not shver. Kam b'mishameshes, kam b'peiletes. Reb Shimon was only referring to peiletes. If an isha emits zera, so over there the tumah is because of the actual zera, she can't become tamei more stringently than the individual who the zera had originated from. And therefore, only if the zera actually leaves her guf, she'll be tamei. However, this brayso is referring to mishameshes. It is the act of tashmish that is matame the isha, and that is a totally different category, which is unrelated to our discussion. And in that case, even if it was just an internal contact, she is tamei. It is not the contact that is being matame here, but rather the tashmish. If the discussion earlier was regarding an isha that's poilet, that's emitting zera, 1 second. If she's already tamei because of the tashmish, why then do you need to discuss any tumah mitzad that is resulting from peiletes? She's already tamei. You can't be tamei twice. Peiletes typically derive it, know it from the ma'isa tashmish. The shimsha, she was already tamei because of the tashmish. We're discussing a case where she had gone to the mikveh post tashmish, and therefore, as far as the tumah's tashmish that had already left, she had already cleansed herself from that, and now the halacha is that if she's poilet, if she emits a zera, she'll become tamei because of a totally different reason. Now the Gemara is going to analyze this scenario. There's a tumah's tashmish, but if she's toivel, she is tired from the tashmish, and she could still potentially become tamei from poiletes. Do you mean to say that if she's mishamish and then she's toivel, she will only become tamei and for that day, and the tefillah and the nightfall will be matayr her, and she's done with it? Rava had said, mishameshes, the isha it's mishamish, kol shloisha yamim asur lecha b'truma. She's tamei for 3 days thereafter. Why is that so? She'i efshar lo shalei tiflet. Inevitably, there's going to be an emission of zera 3 days following the tashmish, because after 3 days, the zera is already useless, worthless, and does not carry with it any tumah. But at least up until 3 days, we presume that the isha is poilet zera, and she cannot eat truma. So how could you go ahead and say that after tashmish, all she needs to do is be toivel and have herav shemesh, have nightfall come, and then she's tar, completely tar? Within the next 3 days, there's always a chash of a peiletes. So how do these two things coincide? After the Gemara Hachiv Mayaskina, we're speaking about a keshet bilu b'mita. Our brayso, which states that a mishameshes can have tefillah, is in a very narrow case where she was hutval, she was immersed, immobile. She was in the mita. She had never gotten up, and there was no chashash, there's no concern for zera leaving the guf. The only tumah she has is because of the mishameshes. And once she goes to the mikvah, she's free of that, and she has nothing else to be concerned about. So you mean to say that Rava's halacha is speaking about a case where she wasn't in a mita. She wasn't immobile, she was rather walking, and therefore there is an ongoing chash of emitting zera within the next 3 days. Is that the interpretation? Mechlal, if that's so, the chiyama Rava, the azla I bekara, she's walking to the mikvah v'tavla and she's being tayvel. How can you go ahead and say that for the next 3 days she's certainly tummy because of the paileta zera? Perhaps you could suggest that all the zera had left her guf immediately. There's nothing to give us the absolute supporting evidence that there's tumah for the next 3 days. Yeah, there's a concern, but there's certainly room to think that the zera had all trickled out in the first moments of her walking. Dilma, perhaps as she was walking, she got rid of it and she totally expelled all the zera she had within her. So how could Rava go ahead and make a blanket statement that for the first 3 days after Tashmish Isha is Vada, is certainly Tameh, which would imply that it is a certainty, it is a fact? There's always room to believe that perhaps the zera is completely expelled, and at the most there is a concern that there's still some zera remaining, but it's only a suffix and it's not a Vadai. So if you'll propose Dilma Ishtayer, if you'll propose that perhaps there is some zera remaining, if that's so, Rabbi should state it a little differently. We're concerned, Shema, perhaps in Shtayr there's some zera remaining. But you can't go ahead and be certain about that. Hello. So you must say a little bit different. That Rava as well is speaking about when she was hutval in the mita, she was immobile. And therefore there is a chash that the zera remained in her guf. And up for the next 3 days, up until Gimel Yomim, there is still chash of peletis. So if so, how do you reconcile Rava with the Brisa? The Brisa quoted a pasuk that an Isha is tummy until she goes to the mikvah after Tashmish. And Rava goes ahead and tells us that no, for the first 3 days, there is no solution. There is always a chash of peletes. So how do you reconcile these two things? V'loi kasha, it's not shver. Kan v'misapeches, kan m'she'ena misapeches. One case is speaking about, Rava's case is speaking about that she turned over, meaning even though she was in the mita, she wasn't actually walking, but since she shifted her body, she turned herself upside down, there is a room to believe that the zera started trickling out, and therefore the first 3 days carry to the chash, a concern and a suspicion that the zera will continue trickling out, and she cannot eat truma, she can't presume herself to be tar until the zera has completely left her guf. However, the Brisa, which is referring to a case of Eina Misapeches, where she was lying immobile in her bed and never shifted her body to the point that there's a chash, there's a concern for the zera to leave her guf. Therefore, the only tumah she has is the tumah as a result of the tashmish, and once she's taken for that, she's completely tar. So, in summary, we have 3 separate cases with 3 separate halachas. Isha, when she is mishamish, is tummy, a tumas erif, meaning she could technically go to the mikveh and be tar as soon as nightfall arrives. However, that is strictly when she is immobile, never shifted her guf to the extent that it arouses suspicion of zera leaving her guf. In that case, there would be an additional tumah of peiletas zera. That is the case of Rava, where she was misapeches, and therefore for the next 3 days she's still presumed to be tamei. And over here it's a vadai, it is a definite tumah, because we know that zera is leaving her guf within the next 3 days. However, in a case where she actually gets up on her feet and walks, in that case, true, the zera, we have reason to believe the zera is trickling out, but perhaps she totally expels it in the first moments of her activity, and in that case there is merely a chash, it is a suffix that there is zera coming out within the next 3 days. She is not tamei vadai, but she is tamei besafek. One more line in the Gemara. The Rava's statement that for the first 3 days after Tashmish she is tamei. Akrokai, he's referring to the pasuk. The pasuk which teaches us that an isha which is tayvel after Tashmish is tar must be referring to a case of eina misapeches, where she was lying immobile immobilized, without any mishapeches, without any turning over of the guf, and therefore there's no chash of priletes. However, if there's any shifting of the guf to the extent that we choshesh that it may have caused a pleta, then she is tamei within the next 3 days. Again, v'rova akroka, he's referring to the pasuk v'achei kamar. This is what he meant to say. Ki katsav rachmana. When does the Torah say v'rachzu b'mayim? If they wash themselves in water, they immerse in the mikveh v'tamad or the tummy until nightfall. That is only strictly b'she'ena mishapeches, when she hasn't overturned herself. Aval b'mishapeches. But if there's a reason to believe that the shift in the guf had caused a pleta's zera, kol shleisha yamim asura lechel b'truma. For the first 3 days she's still asur. She'ef shalosh leitifleit. It can't be that there was no emission of zera, and therefore she remains tamei, not because of the tashmish, but rather because of the emission of zera. So let's make a quick summary of the last Gemara. We have a halacha of mishameshes, the isha that are mishamesh atami ad erev. We have additional halacha of poilet shichva zera. If the isha expels, emits the zera coming from the bayal, she is tamei. The Tanakama says it has the same category as dam niddah, even if it only came out up until the bayis achitzain. She is already tamei. What is the bayis achitzon? We have two shitas. Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yechon. Rish Lakish holds that the place which is visible by a tinoikas, by a young girl sitting, that is considered the bayis achitzon. You need to have the dam exit until that point. Rabbi Yechon says, no, that's already considered like outside the guf. Even if the dam or the, in our case, the zera, only reached the point of bein hashanayim, right outside the bein hashanayim, because the actual bein hashanayim is considered like inside. So right outside the bein hashanayim, that is already considered a tumas, a re'iyah of a tuma, and is matame the isha. According to Rav Shimon, regarding zera, you equate the isha to the ish, since it originated from the ish. You cannot be machmir, you can't impose stringency on the isha more than the ish, and you need to have the tuma, the zera, actually exit the guf, and only then is it matame the isha, just as by the ish, the tuma, the zera, needs to actually exit the guf to be matame him. Now, one final halacha regarding isha that's mishamish. If she actually gets up and is active and walks after the tashmish, there is only a chash tuma, there is only a chash for the next 3 days that perhaps some zera is still inside her and is being constantly emitted. If she is lying b'mita, immobilized, totally immobilized, all she needs to do is be tayvel and she's completely tar. If she's on the mita but is mishapech, turns herself over, then in that case, a tefillah right now wouldn't do her much good, because for the next 3 days there is certainly zera being emitted, which is matame the isha.